learning. Hey, welcome everyone today. So we've got a really great session about the integrated world of Microsoft Cloud frameworks. So the cloud ecosystem and Microsoft ecosystem is quite large with many different pieces, different components that interconnect with each other. So one of the questions that you might have is what does best practice look like? What framework do you use when? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So thank you very much to Saul, our speaker, who's going to come and present on that today. So I've got a few housekeeping rules to go through before we get into the awesome session. First off, this is part of the Azure Cloud Commanders learning room. So within the Microsoft Tech community, if you go to Microsoft Learn, you can go and select groups and you can see a whole bunch of learning rooms. So for example, the one that we run today is the Azure Cloud Commanders learning room. So there's discussions going on and sessions such as this happening as well. So definitely check out previous events and upcoming events as well. We've got one tomorrow morning, New Zealand time, and one on the first week of November. So quite a few events lined up for you to learn from. So make sure you check out the Azure Cloud Commanders Learning Room and join in on the chat and sessions. So just for full awareness, this is being recorded for those who can't make it or see it. If you do post in the chat, what I will usually do is if there's a question, for example, which I do encourage, I'll highlight that in the chat. And so be aware that if there's anything organization context, for example, other people may see that. So just be wary of what you post. The audience that we have is coming from different industries, different diverse backgrounds, different knowledge bases. So just make sure that there's no question that's a stupid question. Just be welcoming, be human. Everyone's here to learn and hopefully have fun. So thank you very much for doing that. So I just want to hand over to Saul. So thank you very much, Saul, for presenting on the cloud frameworks today. I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself more and take it away. I'm interested to learn a lot.
Appreciate it. All right, let me go ahead and select the right monitor here.
Yeah, I keep looking at the other screen because it's not usually where I would host. So, and then add to stage. Yeah.
Okay, and then let's see. So I have it there. There we go. Perfect.
There you go.
Okay. Well, Luke, again, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And so tonight or today or this afternoon or wherever you're at, I do want to talk about cloud frameworks. We'll start off, which by the way, I know this PowerPoint looks a little off. I thought it was pretty nice because it's called architecture in PowerPoint. We'll see how fitting it is. My name is Saul Patino, and I'm a multi-cloud architect and strategist. I currently work as a cloud solutions architect for CBTS and multi-service provider in the state of Ohio, in the United States. And we also have a sister company called Onyx in Canada. So it's a multinational company. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer, and I'm a speaker, or you could just say I like to talk a lot. I do bring about 15 years of experience, and I've worked in hypervisors, so Hyper-V, VMware, and then later on in my career, Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. My expertise has been more on the hybrid and multi-cloud architecture. I really enjoy that, working from a MSP in a small companies, you get exposed to a lot of stuff. So I took advantage of everything I learned and kind of balled it all together, and eventually became a cloud architect. So that's what I enjoy. And there's a couple of QR codes that we could never miss. So today's agenda, and it'll be more hopefully a dialogue, but it's going to be talking about the cloud or the cloud frameworks. Why are they important? And then I want to list a couple. Most of these you possibly will understand what they are, but there's a couple that you'll start understanding how they kind of piecemeal together, right? So we'll start off with why frameworks. Now, I mentioned earlier, I used to work with a multi-service provider, right? MSP. And here in the States, we call them mom and pop shops, right? They're usually pretty small. They might have an owner, maybe two owners, a couple of buddies, whatever the case may be. But because of the way they're working, they usually have to take any job they got, right? So if someone comes and says, "Hey, I have this horribly complex job or task that I need, and I got very little money, would you take it?" They're going to say yes, right? And so for me, that was good because I got exposed to a lot of different technologies, and so that's kind of what jump started my career. The problem with that is there was no kind of checklist, there was no kind of guardrails, there was nothing in place. And so it was always putting out fires, it was always just chaos. And usually, you can't live like that day to day, right? It's just not feasible. It's not controllable, and there's nothing you can do. So later on in I guess you could say in my career, I started to notice, the different guardrails. And nowadays, those guardrails, we call them frameworks, right? So what is a framework? Well, I like to say codified wisdom, right? It's wisdom, it's industry principles, it's standards that, depending on where you are in your cloud journey, or depending on where the mentality is, the business needs, it's information that you need to leverage to be able to achieve a certain goal, right? And it's a common language between different companies, right? You'll notice how some of these are very popular. FinOps, right? Is something that now is understood very well. DevOps. Some of the bigger frameworks that we've worked about, it is common language between them, and it makes it very clear. In fact, so clear that I guarantee I could talk to an Azure architect in Asia, and obviously translated in Japanese and Chinese, and tell him, well, architect the framework, he's going to understand. And guess what? If we use Google Translator or something like that, we're going to be talking the same language. We're going to be understanding very technical terms, because it's a common language. We also want to have context, right? Lift and shift has always had that bad connotation of just take it in one place, take it into the other place. But when you put context behind something, it becomes optimized. It has more governance. It has more skill. So it's more organized. And then at the end of the day, all these frameworks will provide you a roadmap, right? You want to have a structured path that you can continuously improve, and you want to make sure that you can mitigate risk whenever possible. So, in the grand scheme of things, the framework is going to be a principle that you can leverage to be able to reach that goal. That's never there, right? And that's why whenever I have these conversations, I like to just mention it as a cloud journey, right? A cloud journey, you don't know where it's going to lead you. It's ever ending, and unless you see a stop sign, or unless you see something, that cloud journey is going to continue, right? And so that's how I like to see this, as a cloud journey. So again, when we talk about these frameworks, right, it depends on where you're at in the cloud journey. One of the more popular ones from Microsoft, and actually for the other cloud providers, is the cloud adoption framework, right? So there's two frameworks that whenever I talk to the clients that I work with, I like to mention. And it's going to be one of two things, right? It's either going to be a net new, right, a greenfield environment that's new, or that they're going to migrate into. And usually it's new. But then you also have a brownfield environment, which there's already resources in there. Now, what the cloud adoption framework does is it gives you that strategy to be able to adopt that cloud, right? So when I say adopt, I mean actually start using it, shifting your workloads and becoming part of that cloud, right? as opposed to a well-architected framework, which you're already on step maybe 2 or 3. A CAF, a cloud adoption framework, is usually that first step. And again, the whole point of that is Microsoft wants to make sure that you think clearly of what you're doing, because if you could put those stones and set them really firm, then that road is going to be very easy to walk on, right? And so the components that pretty much make up the framework, you're going to see it's a strategy. Obviously, the first one is actually strategy. They want you to be able to align with the business goals. If you can align with those business goals, then you can grow. You can understand where your money's going at. You can understand how the governance is. You'll understand those components that 6 months down the road or a year down the road, you realize, you know what, I wish someone would have told me that I should have tagged from the beginning, or had a standard framework of tagging, or maybe some workbooks or something in particular that now I don't have to worry about. Or it could be your business goals, right? You want to make sure that you're aligned to those. You set out a plan, right? And then when you're CAF ready, you could say, hey, you know what? My Azure environment is ready to host those workloads. Again, it could be a 1 or 2 test VMs that you were doing, and you realize, hey, you know what? I'm good to go. I can scale now. I can grow. And then that's when you adopt, right? So those are the principal ones. The other ones, the ongoing processes, you're going to notice they're very similar to what we call a landing zone, right? The governance, security, management. So speaking of which, once we are actually in Azure, then we have to start thinking about, what are we going to do in Azure? How are we going to keep ourselves in that guardrail? The well-architected framework is usually, I call it a starter framework, but it's a very good framework, because what it does is, once you go from adopting cloud, right, and in cloud, then at that point you really have to understand it. That's what we call the maturity level. And actually, the well architected framework, if you go on their website, I want to say within the last year or so, they have maturity levels now. And it makes plenty of sense, because when you're in Azure now, you want to become mature. Um, I have, and I'll have to give it to you later, Luke, but on my website, I'm working on an app that visualizes these things. And whenever I work with companies that have a well-architected framework, I have this spider graph that kind of shows all their different tiers, and it's pretty much in the middle, right? And that's how I can identify the customer as being well-architected. That doesn't mean that they're not going to change. In fact, most definitely they're going to change. But what I want to make sure is that this point in their journey, which should be a pretty early part of the journey, they're well architected. They understand what cloud optimization is. They understand what security is, reliable, and performance efficiency, right? They understand those core concepts. And when you get to that point, then I guarantee you, for the most part, the client understands what's going on, right? They understand the holistic picture of cloud, and so that's a perfect jumping off point to start focusing on different frameworks. So I really enjoy having clients come to me and say, "Hey, you know what? Tell me more about this well-architected framework," because I understand that they're mature. I understand that they're gonna that they know what the importance is, and one of the very key components of this is a landing zone. That landing zone, it actually builds on the operational efficiency. I'm sorry, and then pieces of cost optimization, pieces of reliability, even security. Right. So it's building off of those pieces, and that's why it's very important for people, for clients, and for partners, and for people just in cloud to focus on that. We have a lot of customers that come in and say, "Hey, how expensive is it to keep it up, maintain it?" People don't understand, because it's governance. The components that you really rely on for a landing zone, it's on the platform, it's on Azure. So there's not cost. You're not deploying VMs. You're not doing a lot of resources. And so, aside from the fact that you're probably going to spend some money for the labor, um, the resources you can have in place, and you can do it very early in your journey. So I always recommend a landing zone during either the CAF or the well-architected framework component. So once you are well established, you're good to go. Then you start working with your team to see which way you want to go. Now, I'm going to mention a couple of these frameworks, but because I feel that they're important, but your business might not, right? I've been in organizations where they want to grow, right? And if you're going to grow, then you can't have those limiting factors. Most people, and the reason I started with FinOps is because most people and some of the clients I talk to, they're like, "Hey, Saul, tell me all FinOps. We want to adopt this FinOps framework, right? We want to go and start using reservations, and we want to go and start using tagging." And then the first thing I tell them is, that's great, but that's like one little Lego in this big old thing that we call FinOps. FinOps is a principle just like everything else, and so we have to understand that with a principle, it's not it's a physical thing you grab. There's rules, there's standards, there's teams that have to come together. In FinOps, they talk about personas, right? That identity, and then there's all sorts of different things that you have to put in place. Now, the reason that FinOps is so important is because you'll notice that you'll start, and it's not so much saving money, it's actually identifying where the spending is and allowing you to grow even faster. Because when you can save that money, what are you doing? You're going to put it back into whatever you're doing and you're going to start producing faster. You're going to start making more money out of what you're making, right? So it's more of being efficient with your framework. And so a lot of the businesses that we have don't understand that core component. They think that all it takes is a couple of different usage of resources or a couple of configurations here or there, and then they think they're going to save money. And so usually I like to have a conversation, try to explain this framework to the clients and let them know, no, the whole purpose of this is so you actually grow. We want you to use that money where it needs to be at. And so, this is one of those frameworks that it's really, really misunderstood. Now, one that isn't misunderstood is zero trust, right? And this framework, based off of the security layer, is not misunderstood at all because it's never trust anyone, right? Always verify. Nowadays, with the way that AI and even before AI, we shouldn't be surprised. Data in general, right? We started to kind of shift into this mentality. Before everyone's like, cloud, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. Let me put it all in my house. Let it talk to the internet, without any kind of guardrails. That's in the past, right? Data is very important, and it's probably in every company's main asset. And so you have to learn not to trust any kind of connectivity that is not inside the organization. And so zero trust, that's what it does. It doesn't just, again, it's a principle. It's not, hey, let me sell you this resource, or let me sell you this appliance, or let me sell you this product, right? No, it's a mentality. It's you shifting the way that you used to do things, and it's a organizational shift. It's not a one team thing. Now, granted, it's usually identity management and your SecOps and those kind of team members, but you still have to adopt it throughout the whole company, right? And so zero trust is one that we're going to see more and more often now because of AI, because of that of gray cloud of should I use AI, but no, I don't want to. And then trying to leverage Purview. I've seen a lot of people try to use Purview, and unfortunately, they're not prepared for it. And so that's also a hurdle, right? So all these components are making zero trust something that a lot of companies are realizing. You know what? If I can put this in there, then we've already shifted our mindset, and now we can be a little bit more. You could say we can be a little bit more forward thinking when it comes to our data because we have a framework that we didn't trust anyone anyways. And so that will give us that extra layer of security. Now, with the zero trust movement or principle, Microsoft has their own type of principle inside of that. Now, Microsoft calls it SFI, Secure Feature Initiative. And what they're doing, and then you can see it kind of follows the same pattern, right? Secure by design, secure by default, secure operations, right? This is an initiative that started a couple of years ago, and from what my understanding is that they wanted to improve their security posture, right? They had a couple of situations that really was putting a black eye on Microsoft, and so they own that, and they said, you know what, we're going to change the way we think. And And that's one of the key factors of defining the framework, right? Is changing your principles, changing your values. Now, we've all been affected by it. Obviously, we saw MFA get pushed out very quickly. That was one of the initiatives from this. Some of the other initiatives are the default or the now no default to the internet on Azure, stuff like that. Those are components that people don't realize that Microsoft is doing for a purpose, right? And it's making their environments more secure on our end or on our behalf, right? But it's things that they're doing. And you're going to see little by little things are going to pop out that you're going to be like, you know what, this makes sense. And why wasn't it done before? And Microsoft's going to push it, but it's because of that. It's because, just like anyone, like the push that everyone had for a green earth, right? And then everyone kind of collaborated and everyone started to say, you know what, this is great. Let's take it as a world movement. I think this is, that movement. You're going to start seeing more companies focus on zero trust, and you're going to start seeing initiatives like this that, the companies are going to say, we're going to have to stand up and hold our hand and let the customer know this is what they need to do. We're not going to give them the option. We're going to kind of almost force it on them because they don't understand how important it is. And this is one of those initiatives. Now, one that I enjoy a lot, it's because this is something that I enjoy doing. This Microsoft's adaptive cloud. So a couple of years ago, I want to say probably maybe 7 or 8. I mean, I guess it all depends on, even in Europe, I think it was a little bit quicker. Microsoft realized, hey, I think we've reached the people that are early adopters and evangelists, and it's going to be kind of hard to make everyone go all in into cloud as quickly, right? Before, people would hear cloud and they're like, it's the next best thing. Let's move everything up. And then 6 months down the road, because they probably didn't practice spin-offs, so probably didn't do a landing zone and whatnot, they had issues. They had complications. They got expensive. And so, they realized, hey, maybe the cloud isn't for me, right? Fast forward now, and Microsoft has an adaptive cloud, right? What they're telling the customers is you can have a hybrid environment. You can have multi-clouds, right? You can have AWS. You can have IoT devices, right? All these components, they're going to leverage the tools that we have in place for security, for governance. All the components, again, you'll hear those words again, are part of the well-architected framework, right? They're using Azure Arc as that mechanism to connect to other clouds for their governance. They're using different technologies, different communication protocols, and they're using AI in the background. AI is going to be able to pull this data and give you a vision, a view of how to work with this. And you can see this being more of a way to have more of a ops as a service, right? Because essentially you're going to have all these devices in your network and you're going to see them. And I don't know if you've used Azure Arc, but with Azure Arc, that's what you see. You see a single pane of glass, and it gets to be some VMs in Google Cloud and some from AWS, and obviously the ones you have on-prem. And so that's what the adaptive cloud is. Microsoft is saying, hey, that's fine. Just if you have them and you work with Azure, utilize all these tools you have, right? Utilize all these tools. If you want to go from AWS and all of a sudden shift over to Microsoft or to Azure, then we can help you probably with Azure Arc and migrating some databases, or maybe we can, they give you different possibilities, different solutions. For adaptive cloud, Azure Arc is going to be that one key component. But then this is kind of where Azure Local comes in, right? And in Europe, obviously those countries are right now going through what we call the sovereignty discussion, right? And we start talking about Azure Local, M365 Local. That's part of the adaptive cloud. It's just think of adapting to your needs, and Microsoft is trying to do a good job on that. I think this is going to grow again when we talk about AI. Adaptive cloud is going to give you that mechanism to be able to run your data, right? Your data close to you, and be able to leverage AI on it, right? You'll be able to have AI services on it, possibly have that hybrid connection to it. Open AI, you'll have there's I think it's called Katos, where you're running Kubernetes and you actually deploy it straight from Windows Admin Center, right? So it's allowing you to create these different types of compute and doing it on Azure Local. And once you have that so close to you and your data's there, right? That's one of the big walls that I see my customers, fighting with is great, but it's my data, right? And I don't feel comfortable putting it in the cloud and then opening it wide open to either a Copilot or SharePoint and whatnot. And so that's how Adaptive Cloud is going to kind of help that out. And then there's DevOps. Now, I said DevOps or SRE because I've been reading more into SRE a little bit more. I think we see it a lot in MSPs, right? That focus of how are we going to take problems, because at the end of the day, managed services, right? They get hired on not because of proactive work, right? That's what we call professional services in the mainstay. Managed services is for reactive work, right? You expect to have tickets, you expect to have fires, you expect to have all these components, right? And so their focus is actually on software reliability, which guess what? That's kind of what DevOps really does. Now, I know this one will kind of show differences, but SRE, the principles of SRE is making sure that software is reliable, making sure that team members are operating in a sense that everyone knows everything and there's communication. You work with the development team to make sure that there's that really close knit of the operations team and the reliability team. And DevOps, that's how it was founded, right? It was the DevOps team working with operations team, right? Instead of having the DevOps just kind of throw in, I had a really good friend that would always tell me they're just throwing stuff over the wall, right? And the wall's so high, you kind of don't see what's coming until it hits you. And that's what DevOps was, right? Where you had the team of developers working with the operations team and kind of having that chain, back and forth, and it was constantly improving. So I like to associate. I usually like to put them together. I think they work really well, and I think the focus is repeat and constantly be looking at the software, constantly be working at a goal, and then not only that, but holding everyone accountable. It's not just one person anymore; it's a whole team. And so I like to think as DevOps and Arizari is that that pillar of reliability, right, and operational excellence. So that's how I see these frameworks working. Now, if we talk about in the future, how will they work? Well, one of them will not define just one company. Nowadays, you see that flexibility. You see business needs in different areas now, right? One company cannot just say we're going to go all in FinOps. Now, they might be going into FinOps because the main objective might be AI, right? And then it's going to shift as they get close to the AI. Another company might be very close to a zero trust type of framework, but then they're going to realize, hey, you know what? We have to open up a little bit, right? We have to take a little bit of risk so we can grow. And so I see that well-architected framework, it'll kind of shift maybe in two areas, and then that's how they're defined, right? Unless they stay right in the middle. And I think if they stay in the middle, then they're not going to risk enough to grow. They're not going to see the benefits of that, and it's fine, right? There's some companies that feel comfortable being in the middle, not taking any risk, understanding that they're not going to grow as fast because their money isn't invested in maybe the DevOps arm, but that's okay because the security area is also not risking any kind of different possibilities, and so it all depends on what the business needs is. It all depends on what the C-suite decides. All those components are kind of what focuses on the framework. And once you understand what framework you want, then that's when you have to really, really follow those principles, right? And be able to actually implement them so you can be successful.
I'm clicking buttons, but yeah, that was actually really insightful. I think, like I said at the start, the complexity of different things within the Azure ecosystem and how you design stuff, right? It's where do you start? Like, is it the cloud adoption framework? Is it FinOps? Is it like, do you crawl? Do you run? Do you walk? Do you jump straight to the ready stage of the cloud adoption framework? Like,
well, I hope you don't do that last one because you're just asking for trouble, right?
Yeah.
I do feel right. If a customer came to me and asked me where do we start, Saul? even Microsoft helps you out, right?
Mm,
Microsoft will at times partake and even invest in the hygiene of a customer coming in brand new, right? And it's because they want them to be successful. Obviously, for their own reasons as well, right? Someone that's successful is also going to spend more money in the cloud, but for the most part, they'll either do some type of migration assessment, which is what a cloud adoption will turn out to be, or if it's a net new, then once they're in the cloud, they'll do what an architect review, right? Let's see how healthy you are. Let's see what your workloads are. And something that if you start diving into a little bit more deeper is a war, right? An actual review. And so that's
mm,
something Microsoft has a lot of assessments online, and and
yes, yeah.
and, and you can use you actually log in with your credentials, right? And so it's a little tedious, right? Because some of them you have to ask a lot of questions, um, but it gives you an idea, right? And that's kind of what I use on some of these assessments, because you know I always tell my clients, hey, you got to be honest with this. This isn't for me, right? This isn't a homework. I'm not going to grade it for you. I am going to give you a grade, but that grade is to help you improve, right? And so that's how you can see that.
And best practices change all the time. I think that's one of the benefits of these frameworks is it represents the current state of best practices according to what's happening across the industry and what the new technology and ways of working are. Like if we looked at the cloud adoption framework even a year ago, it will be missing a whole bunch of like subscription vending or platform engineering components and recommendations that exist today. So I think it's one of the benefits of a review as well as you're reviewing current state as of today. So yeah,
It's going to change. A good example, and actually, I have an article in my in my one of the blog posts. I talk about how architecture's changing. Right, we were used to
mm,
having that three-tiered or a tiered application, a tiered workload, where normally it's a backend database, you have some middleware, and then you have a front end tier, right? And so the architecture, the designs that you see in Azure, you see that they're well defined. In fact, they'll tell you to use network segmentation, right? That's a best practice, and they'll tell you to use NSGs and stuff like that. But you think about where we were at 5 years ago, and now you think about it now. We don't see those
mm,
workloads that anymore. We don't really focus on IS servers anymore. So you're not going to have network segmentation anymore, right? If anything, you're working off of APIs, and now with AI, you're working with MCPs. You're working with
MCP.
yeah, and so it's now a flat network, right? And it's a flat topology, and it's a flat framework where you focus more on zero trust now. In fact, it's even more important than ever, right? And you focus on FinOps, because why? Again, AI, it'll churn money, right? And you don't even realize it. And that's one of the biggest
Mm.
complaints is, hey, we're not seeing that cost. In fact, Microsoft's making a big push, even with Copilot, right? Is to let them know, hey, go buy tokens, go prepay tokens, so you can keep on working, because this is going to happen. So even then, you're right. Those frameworks are going to shift as we move forward and as we get different technology, as things improve, and that's going to change the way we think about best practices.
Someone once said to me, and it stuck with me throughout, was cloud is not where you work, it's how you work. And I agree with that because you just the cloud enables more, but with that comes the responsibility of kind of understanding the nuances and the trade-offs, and that's
Yeah.
where these frameworks help. So, mm,
Yes, yes. No, and then it's again, I work with clients day to day, and one of the things that I try to do is I try to listen at the beginning to see where they're at, right? Because you're right, it's where you work, and a lot of these people have different thought process. They have their different points of the journey, right? They're in different points of the cloud journey. Some of them might be to a point where they're like, look, we either have to cut back on cost, or we're gonna have to, start shifting back on prem. Some of them are, hey, we're growing so fast, we need a proper deployment principle. We need to focus more on DevOps. There's all sorts of things. So it really depends on where you work. And I think that once they understand that, then
Mm.
they'll actually get better. And that's the other thing is whenever you put these principles in place, some of them work off of others, right? If you're talking about FinOps, and this is a perfect example because whenever I talk to a customer, and like I gave an example earlier, they think that FinOps will be certain actions, right? But they don't understand that they're developers. They don't understand that maybe some of those engineers, if they don't have that mindset, then all
Yeah,
their
it's a
work is
way of
for nothing.
working. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it has to be a mindset of everyone, and it has to be principles. It can't just be actions, or it's not going to work.
Well, thank you, Saul, for coming and presenting to us today. There's no questions in the chat, but I just want to say thank you very much. Is there any last comments or thoughts, or like, for example, what resources would like? I put the links in the chat as well, but the cloud adoption framework, the well architected framework, the FinOps framework. You touched a bit on Azure Architecture Center as well. Is there anything else that you'd recommend for
Yeah,
people looking to get into the space?
Microsoft Learn is obviously, something that we're all going to be like, hey, this is where you get most of it. The Azure Architecture Center is great, right? I mean, usually I go in there and that's where, even if it's just to have ideas, right? Um, the FinOps, there is the FinOps Foundation, right? And that's
Mhm.
the pretty much I would say that the standard. There's other FinOps practices, but I think a lot of people recognize them as a standard for that. And then the Security Future Initiative is obviously something that's also being pushed by
That's
uh,
right. Yep.
by Microsoft. Now, zero trust, even though zero trust is in Microsoft Learn, right? It's a principle adopted by all the clouds. In fact, um, I'll have to get the name for it, but zero trust was actually first kind of thought up by an organization in Google Cloud. I think it's called Good Company or something like that. I'll send it to you. But strange enough, right? When you read the article on that, it was those fundamental key components, right? Trust no one and all those components, but they didn't realize the movement that was going to be, right? And so that's
Yep.
kind of curious. But obviously, Microsoft and AWS and especially Google have made strides on making sure that every single endpoint is covered by zero trust. So you can see Microsoft documentation. I think they even have a workbook that just got published for zero trust that is really, really good. So
Yeah,
yeah, Microsoft documentation.
it's a good call out that these frameworks and Microsoft focused, but because they're the way of working and the pillars and the principles to work towards, like it's the other clouds have their own similar thing. It's not just because you're on Microsoft Azure, you need all the stuff. No, it's ways of working. It's thinking about how you architect something. It's bringing a whole lot of stuff that potentially may not have been done as properly or thought about as much in the past. It's bringing a lot of that to the forefront. So in my mind, it's making us better IT professionals because it's giving us information about how do you architect something, what are the business rules or the business thought processes that need to be included in this. It's not about because you're on Azure you need all this stuff. It's because you're using cloud, or some of these principles and thought processes actually apply to like on-premises infrastructure as well because it's how you work, not.
Exactly. So
Mm.
a good way that I like to think about it is, sometimes I tell my son, hey, you got to think of this, and they're like, oh, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm like, well, you got to practice your brain muscle, right? Or you're going to forget. Obviously, Spanish is one of those things where I'm like, hey, you got to practice or you're going to forget it. Well, that's kind of what we have to do, right? We might not work in security. I might not work in security, but because I have to follow those principles, then I have to practice it. And you're right. To become a cloud engineer, that's why there's that big gap, is because people don't understand that cloud is not just a hypervisor. It's not just a box of memory chips and a CPU, and that's all you have to worry about, and maybe a couple of disks, right? Which
Yeah.
any hobbyist can do. The cloud is very, very complicated, and Microsoft enjoys just to bring out new new services and new
They
types of
do. Yeah.
technology, and so it's big. And so to be a true architect and a true engineer, you have to at least understand how all those play together. Because someone that's just playing VMs, Microsoft is going to be the first one that says, "Hey, you're doing it wrong," right? You have to leverage all the tools we have in the toolshed.
Well, thank you very much to yeah, for coming, presenting, talking to us today. For those who also were looking to watch this last week, apologies, we had to reschedule. So thank you very much for staying with us. But yeah, thanks again. So yeah, I'll end it here. But thank you very much for coming and presenting to us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Luke. You have a good afternoon. Good night. Thank you very much.